A Brief History of Pimlico by Gillian Staples, adapted from a talk by Alison Kenney. Early Pimlico was a pretty rural area. Medieval Westminster consisted of mostly bishops' palaces along the Strand, down Whitehall to Westminster Abbey and the Palace of Westminster. Building development was gradually moving west from the City of London, with Covent Garden emerging in the 1630s and Soho and St James's emerging in the 1670s. The manor of Eyre, which ran from Oxford Street down to the Thames, was owned by Westminster Abbey. According to the Domesday Book of 1086, this was divided into 4 areas: the Bailiwick of St James, Hyde Park, Manor of Ebury and Manor of Neat. The Manor of Ebury had a farmhouse on the site of what is now Victoria Coach Station, and fields in Mayfair, Belgravia and Pimlico. The Manor of Neat was the Abbot's Manor near Ebury Bridge and the site of the current Abbot's Manor estate. The name Pimlico was first recorded in 1625. It was used to describe a settlement on the site of Victoria Square. It is possibly a Spanish word, and one suggestion is that it was named after an inn which sold drink created by Ben Pimlico, a late 16th century publican in Hoxton. The Laurie and Whittle map of 1819 shows some of the main parts of the area before it was developed. Early Pimlico was very sparse. On this map we can see fields, osier or reed beds, neat house gardens and the Chelsea Waterworks. The medieval causeway, which is now Warwick Way, specialised in market gardening. It has also been recorded that the area had plague pits from the Great Plague of 1665. There were just a few houses, including cottages along Millbank, which were mentioned in Pepys's diary and were also home to Nell Gwyn's mother. There were also public houses and gardens around what is now Ebury Bridge, and there was also Fivefields, a lawless area frequented by highwaymen, murderers and other criminals. The name Bloody Bridge emerged, which later became Grosvenor Bridge, on the site of Cliveden Place. By the time we get to the castle map of 1863, building development in Belgravia and Pimlico is clearly visible, as well as Victoria Station in the Grosvenor Canal. The Manor of Ebury was owned by Alexander Davies, and the estate passed to his daughter Mary Davies. In 1677, aged 12, Mary had married 22-year-old Sir Thomas Grosvenor, a Cheshire baronet. The Grosvenors are believed to be descended from William the Conqueror's nephew, and their marriage, though very young by modern standards, was quite the norm during this time. The family began developing the area, and this map from 1723, which was revised by Thomas Cundy in 1822, shows the Grosvenor estate in pink, and the field boundaries with the neighbouring Stanley, Sloane and Lowndes estate. Grosvenor House on Millbank was the home of the estate. It had formerly been called Peterborough House and was the former home of Alexander Davies. It was rebuilt in 1731 and then demolished in 1809 after the Grosvenors moved to Upper Grosvenor Street. The development of the estate used the road structure which was already in place as its foundation. There were turnpikes, or toll gates, at both the lower end of Grosvenor Place and near Ebury Bridge. This image shows another turnpike in the distance at Hyde Park Corner. In 1723, the Chelsea Waterworks Company was established and they took on a 99-year lease from Grosvenor. The company created extensive ponds in the area across the Chelsea and Pimlico border. The purpose of these works were to supply the water to Royal Parks and to Mayfair. The ponds would be filled at high tide from the Thames with the watermill running the pumps, which were eventually replaced with engines. In 1827, Francis Burdett made a complaint in the Commons about the filthy river water being used, and a couple of years later, a sand filtration system was introduced. Another feature of the area was the Grosvenor Canal. Built from 1824 to 1825, it originally connected the Thames to the Grosvenor Basin, which is where Victoria Station now stands. There were lock gates and a basin with wharves on the site of the reservoirs of the Chelsea Waterworks, but as the railways were gradually extended, the canal was shortened. It stopped being used in 1995 and the last remaining section of the canal exists today. Rivers are a natural draw for industry, and the Thames was no different. The Stag Brewery was started by William Green in the 1630s. It later became Elliott's, and then the Watney family became the main partners in the 19th century. Various other partners continued to join and leave the business. The building in Palace Street was demolished in 1959 when the operations moved to Mortlake. Another local producer of drink was the Thamesbank Distillery on Grosvenor Road. It was built by Octavius Smith in 1790, brewing stronger tipples until it closed in 1907. Other industries in Pimlico included Rennie's White Lead Works, established at the end of Turpentine Lane sometime before 1819, Matthias Coopes's paper mill, established in 1801, and then a steelworks, established by Coopes's partner John Hunter and Joseph Brown. The first development for Pimlico came in the mid-18th century. John Gwyn's London and Westminster Improved from 1766 shows a grid iron plan extending from Piccadilly. John Gwyn was an architect and civil engineer, as well as a founding member of the Royal Academy and an advocate of planning control. In around 1818, a man called John Johnson took over the lease on the land, but as Grosvenor were planning to build their canal, they refused to give him land to extend the Coopes Bram dock, and so only a few houses were built at the Thames Parade on Grosvenor Road, Johnson's Place, and cottages in Ranelagh Road. In 1825, Johnson sold his lease to Thomas Cubitt. Starting life as a carpenter, in 1815 Cubitt began his first modern building firm by directly employing craftsmen rather than subcontracting. This carried greater financial risk, and so he needed to recover costs for speculative building quickly. He developed land in the Gray's Inn Road in 1815, Highbury in 1820s, Stoke Newington, Barnsbury, Bloomsbury and Clapham Park in 1824, and later Kemp Town in Brighton in 1828. He's also credited on working on Osborne House and Buckingham Palace and did a few large houses for private clients. Cubitt was amongst several developers in Belgravia, but he was the only one in Pimlico. He lived in his own houses, such as in Eaton Place, and then moved on as the next building progressed. He took over the lease in Pimlico in 1825, but only started building in around 1840. Cubitt mainly built roads, sewers and vaults rather than houses, as he subcontracted a lot of this work. Cubitt's works included brickworks, a sawmill, a joinery, a smithy and a library for workers. He proposed mains drainage for the city in 1843, but this was not implemented until Sir Joseph Bazalgette and the Metropolitan Board of Works did so from 1858. He embarked on Grosvenor Road from 1849 to 54 and created some of Pimlico's famous stucco streets at the wish of the second Marquess of Westminster, though these were expensive to paint. He also built houses in Eccleston Square, Warwick Square and St George's Square and referred to Pimlico as South Belgravia. When Cubitt died, he was worth about £1 million, and Queen Victoria said, "A better, kinder-hearted or more simple, unassuming man never breathed." As well as the wealthy in their grand houses, Pimlico was also home to the working class. By the late 19th century, workers had begun taking rooms in Cubitt's houses in Pimlico. Social reformer Charles Booth called Pimlico a mixture of shabby gentility and vice. Booth is famous for his descriptive map of London poverty, and in this 1889 section, he has marked most of Belgravia and Pimlico as yellow, upper middle class and upper classes, a wealthy area. Red, the well-to-do, middle class. Pink, fairly comfortable and good ordinary earnings, with a few lavender and blue spots. Lavender stood for mixed, some comfortable, others poor. And blue was poor, 18 shillings to 21 shillings a week for a moderate family. The area seemed to avoid the last two categories of very poor and the lowest class, vicious semi-criminal. With the arrival of a larger working class population, Pimlico also saw the emergence of philanthropic housing developments. Between 1865 and 1876, a number of housing estates emerged, including Peabody Avenue, Coles Hill Buildings on Pimlico Road and Ebury Street, the Lumley Buildings on Pimlico Road, and the Ebury Buildings in Semley Place. Also built were the Gatliff Buildings, designed by Thomas Cundy on behalf of the Metropolitan Association for improving the dwellings of the industrious classes. The land was given by Grosvenor in order to house people who had been displaced by the rebuilding of the Grosvenor Gardens. With the development of an area comes new transport links. In the very north, transport opened up with the building of Victoria Street from 1844 to 1851 and the arrival of better rail connections. In 1834, the Great Western Railway wanted to create a terminus near Vauxhall Bridge, but Cubitt objected and the company chose the site of Paddington Station instead. However, all of the rail services from the south terminated south of the Thames, and the majority of people and business was on the north side. London Bridge did well to serve the City of London, but the west of London was lacking services. When the Great Exhibition moved from Hyde Park to Sydenham, the lack of connectivity was even more apparent for tourists trying to travel. All of the southerly rail companies wanted to extend their services north. Work on what was first called the Grosvenor Basin Terminus began in 1858 on a field and canal basin via a private Act of Parliament. Building work had to be approved by Grosvenor Estate, and the companies, under various names, all contributed to the building of the station. It eventually opened on the 1st of October 1860. The station was designed by Robert Jacob Hood and had 6 platforms and 10 tracks. It ran alongside the Grosvenor Hotel, which opened the following year. Despite the obvious benefits a train station brought to the area, some locals in the 1880s voiced their opposition, and they were concerned that the station was encouraging prostitution. Residents' groups petitioned the vestry, and the Grosvenor Estate appointed a detective to get to the bottom of the problem. In 1972, the southern part of Pimlico was connected to the underground network. Pimlico Station was, however, an afterthought, and it was opened a year after the rest of the Victoria Line, when it was felt an additional stop was needed on the southern branch. As well as the rail station, the Victoria area had 2 more significant travel terminals emerge. Victoria Coach Station moved from Looper Street to a new site on Buckingham Palace Road in the early 1930s. A few years later, Imperial Airways Empire Terminal opened across the road, and the building, which still stands today, is home to the National Audit Office. Designed by A. Lakeman and W. H. Williams, the building led directly onto one of the railway platforms at Victoria Station. The trains and coaches leaving here all took passengers to Southampton or Croydon airports for the next stage of their journey. More industry came to the area in the 19th century, such as Bishop's Move Removals on Hugh Street and Belgrave Road in 1854, and Colonel Colt's Armoury on Bessborough Place in around 1844, which supplied weapons for the Crimean War. On Grosvenor Road, the Royal Army Clothing Store opened in 1859, but closed in 1933 for the Dolphin Square development. There was also Broadwood's Woodyard at Crown Reach and Castle's Timber Wharf on Grosvenor Road, which opened in 1890. While developing Pimlico, Cubitt restricted the opening of shops and offensive trades. The main shopping areas were in Elizabeth Street, Pimlico Road, Lupus Street and Warwick Way, which also had a street market in the late 1860s, which moved to Tatchbrook Street in 1945. The area also, unsurprisingly, had public houses, and some great-sounding ones at that. Cubitt had restricted pubs to the Mews in Belgravia, but they soon began to appear on the street corners of Pimlico. Jenny's Whim, which emerged in the early 18th century, had a bowling green, cockpit and duck hunting. It's thought to be the same pub as the Monster Tavern, which was on the site of the Abbot's Manor near Ebury Bridge, so called after the Monastery of Westminster or Monsters in the grounds. There was Bill's Cabin on Warwick Way, which reputedly had bears, but was closed in 1812 when Slender Billy was hanged for forgery. The King's Arms Tavern and Tea Gardens on the Claverton Street Grosvenor Road corner in 1809 also is known to have had fireworks displays. The Orange on Pimlico Road also had a theatre attached to it, called the Royal Orange Theatre. Close by there was the Royal Standard Music Hall, which is now the Victoria Palace Theatre, and a much later addition was the Apollo Victoria, built in 1928. Then there was also the Biograph, which could be found around the corner at 47 to 48 Wilton Road. It opened in 1909 and was possibly London's first cinema, run by American Washington Grant. Of course, there were lots of other institutions which helped forge the character of Pimlico. A staple in any large Victorian town would have been the public baths, and St George's Baths were found at Buckingham Palace Road. For those who couldn't afford a home with washing facilities, these were the only answer to maintain some level of public hygiene. In 1725, the parish of St George Hanover Square was founded, and a sign of the population growth in the area can be found in the number of local churches that emerged within the parish, including St Barnabas, St Gabriel, St James the Less, St Saviour, All Saints, St John Wilton Road, and St Philip on Buckingham Palace Road. Schools are another cornerstone to a local area, and one of the earliest schools in Pimlico was St Michael's Schools. Opened in 1848, the land was given by the Marquess of Westminster on the south side of the Grosvenor Canal, west of Hugh Street. The school was established for 125 boys, 125 girls and 140 infants. The building was demolished for the railway and the school moved to Buckingham Palace Road near Ebury Square in 1870. Other schools included St Gabriel's, opening in 1862. Pimlico Day School, which was a Wesleyan Methodist school in 1871, Heatherley's School of Art and Grosvenor School of Modern Art at 33 Warwick Square, and Pimlico School on Lupus Street, opening in 1971. Other forms of education were found in the Pimlico Literary, Scientific and Mechanics Institute on Winchester Street, which contained classrooms and a library. They showed the students panoramas and encouraged new ways of learning. Education and self-improvement were an incredibly important part of Victorian morals, and in 1850 the Public Libraries Act allowed local boroughs to establish free public libraries to encourage this learning. Victoria Library on Buckingham Palace Road opened in 1893, and then a new library for Pimlico opened on Rampayne Street in 1974, which then moved to Lupus Street in 2010. Some of you may have noticed on a couple of the maps we saw earlier, there was a large hexagonal building which stood out from its surroundings. The Millbank Penitentiary was opened as a new national prison in 1816, but its inaccuracies demoted it to alternative uses relatively quickly, including a military prison and a debtors' prison, before closing altogether in 1890. The site was then transformed, and on the land now stands the Tate Britain, which opened in 1897. The 20th century brought more housing projects to Pimlico, including the Millbank Estate, built between 1898 and 1902 by London County Council. It was done in the arts and crafts style, with its names drawn from the famous artists. Problems with poverty and overcrowding came to the forefront of people's attention when in January 1928 the Thames flood killed 10 people in the area, some of whom were living in basements. This prompted improvements to be made to working-class housing, with new developments in Ebury Bridge Road, the Tatchbrook Estate, and the Grosvenor Flats designed by Edwin Littons on Page Street. The mid-1930s also saw the arrival of Dolphin Square, designed by Gordon Dewes for Costains. It was the largest block of flats in Europe, with 1,236 dwellings and a private swimming pool. Just like the rest of London, Pimlico suffered significant bomb damage during the Blitz. 8,000 coal cellars designed by Cubitt were converted into air raid shelters, and 400 houses were destroyed. Some of the incidents documented include a German Dornier plane, which heading for Buckingham Palace was rammed onto Victoria Station by a British Hurricane fighter, who himself then landed on Fountain Court at the west end of Buckingham Palace Road on the 15th of September 1940. In 1944, Westminster Council began their post-war rebuilding plans and had looked into creating flats between 5 and 10 stories high, with fewer roads and shops. Though the only successful build out of this plan was the Abbots Manor Estate, built in 1955. The Grosvenor Estate sold off Pimlico in the 1950s, having offered the land to Westminster back in 1924. The idea of a big council estate in Pimlico was first mooted in 1936, but the war intervened and so these plans had to be postponed. The Churchill Gardens Estate, named after Sir Winston, was officially opened by Lady Churchill on the 13th of June 1962. The opening ceremony brochure said, "It is a housing estate of which the City of Westminster has every reason to be proud." Westminster City Council launched a competition in 1945, which was won by Philip Powell in Hidalgo Moya, and building commenced the following year. It won a RIBA London Architectural Bronze Medal in 1950 and a Civic Trust Award. The estate became a conservation area in 1990, and 6 of its blocks, plus its heating tower, are Grade 2 listed. The general specification for the estate was 1,680 flats and maisonettes in 32 blocks ranging from 3 to 11 stories over 32 acres. The higher blocks were to be at 90-degree angles to the river and the lower ones parallel to the river. It replaced dwellings for 825 families and on average contained 55 to 60 flats and housing for 200 people per acre. There were one-room flats on the ground floor with accommodation for a nurse. The estate was built in 4 phases by 4 building contractors. They used reinforced concrete faced with brick. The first block, Chaucer House, was started in February 1948. The total cost of the development was £6 million, of which £1.5 million was the cost of land and £4 million the cost of construction. They aimed for rents to equal approximately 1/7 of the total income of a family. The detailed specification for the flats included no long walkways past the front doors, but each to be approached from a staircase. Each flat was to be 550 to 880 square foot, each having a balcony, and to have a square room as much as possible. The kitchen specifications stated that the post-war housewife will have learnt to expect the kitchenette with a good natural lighting, sink with 2 draining boards, cupboards designed for various articles, a table letting down from the wall, a refrigerator, and a gas or electric cooker. There was space for storage of prams and cycles, and some of the blocks also had laundries in their basements. The estate design also included public features such as a community centre, church, schools, a garage, pubs, shops, playgrounds and gardens. It was symbolic to a new post-war approach to rebuilding communities.